AI, labor in the future of San Francisco and the world, actually, that we're talking about. I'm Steve Zeltzer, and I want to thank the library for making this happen. And we've had some very important discussions, which haven't been held, actually, that are important for working people and the people of San Francisco. And as all of you know, in San Francisco, we have a situation of the introduction of autonomous vehicles massively unregulated in San Francisco. And taxi drivers have been driven out of business, and basically the DMV and the California Public Utility Commission are captured agencies. And I've been covering the whole struggle with Waymo and other companies because, in my view, these vehicles are putting health and safety in danger. Besides the economic threat to working people that autonomous vehicles are. One example of that is, as everyone knows, San Francisco has earthquakes. The West Coast has earthquakes. And in an earthquake, what is going to happen? What is going to happen is everyone, once there's an earthquake, will start using their cell phones, and the Wi-Fi will go down. And these automobiles, these autonomous automobiles, will shut down because they're based on Wi-Fi, they're based on that technology. When they shut down in San Francisco, what is that going to mean to the people of San Francisco? It means that ambulances and fire trucks are not going to be able to get through the streets because you're going to have all these autonomous vehicles. That's a real threat. But that doesn't seem to be a threat to the DMV and the California Public Utility Commission. Why? Because they've been captured by Google and these companies. In fact, Google gave $10 million to Gavin Newsom. Google, twice, as I said earlier, there were bills almost unanimously by the California legislature to require a truck driver for trucks over 10,000 pounds. They were twice vetoed by Governor Newsom. And they just approved the introduction of trucks into on California roads. And so that means that truck drivers are going to lose their jobs. But what we're going to focus on now are the question of drivers. And one of the things about what's happening in capitalism is workers have to work these jobs, temp jobs, gig jobs, and this was sold really to people as a way for workers to increase their income. You know, if they weren't making enough, do some gig work. In other words, you're not paid enough, so do some gig work and drive. And that is how that was propagandized by these companies, billion-dollar companies. The reality for the drivers is another story, and how this technology and AI is being used is something that we have to learn about, and we're going to be discussing. So we have Robinson and Jason, who are going to introduce themselves and talk about some of the issues they're addressing and what they're dealing with.
Yeah, my name is Robinson. Thank you. I'm a socialist organizer with the Democratic Socialists of America San Francisco chapter, and in our labor board leadership, and have been working with Rideshare Drivers United since March.
And my name is Jason Munderloh. I'm the head of Rideshare Drivers United, a union for rideshare drivers here in the Bay Area and in California. I'm the head of the Bay Area chapter.
So why don't we first talk about the struggle of drivers to organize. The taxi drivers actually in San Francisco used to be union. They used to be Teamsters. And what happened was when the economy was deregulated, they wanted to make everybody an independent contractor. So this idea of independent contractors was actually used to break the Teamsters union and also destroy Teamsters nationally, where the Teamsters used to be over-the-road drivers, used to be regulated. They destroyed these companies, brought in new companies, non-union, and they weakened the union. So today, what are the problems of drivers, and how are you trying to organize drivers?
Sure. One way to into this would be to describe what actually happens when we use the rideshare apps. From a passenger side, you install the app on your phone. It might ask you a couple of weird questions like, can I have access to the battery on your phone? It wants to know a lot of random things, and you're saying, why am I saying yes? That you can, look at the recordings on my phone, all of these different things. All of that data goes into the passenger side algorithm, which is to optimize the highest amount that they could charge a passenger, right? So if you order an Uber and you're like, why is this so expensive? It's based on that data that they've collected. You know, that your battery is low. The algorithm is going to say, this person is more desperate. They'll pay more for a ride. That's what's happening when you're saying yes to all those permissions. The driver is not getting some cut of that. You might be getting charged, you know, $100 leaving a concert, something like that. The driver is not necessarily making any more than they usually would. They see a different algorithm, and that is the algorithm of where is the closest and most desperate driver, right? They're looking for the driver who's going to say, I will accept a ride even if it's less than minimum wage. And when you actually average out what happens in the industry, drivers take it's less than minimum wage for time behind the wheel by a lot, actually. So drivers are pitted more or less against each other by this algorithm. And if you have a driver who is a very desperate driver, they're going to say yes to anything. And so it's really a race to the bottom for everybody who's just trying to make a little bit of extra money, or anybody who this is their main source of income. You know, that's the reality for a lot of people is this is a very precarious and low-paying and desperate situation for them. They see an offer for a $13 ride to the airport. They really know maybe they shouldn't do that. They should wait for something better. There's no guarantee something better is coming. And so they will take a ride that sometimes even loses money depending on traffic and things like that. So those are the circumstances and the daily work that most drivers have outside of having a union or something that organizes drivers together so that they can say, look, we can get a better deal together. We might be able to get laws passed, that sort of thing. That's the reality. You see a request on your phone, you say yes or no, and you know that other people will take it if you don't. And so that's the task right now, is to organize the drivers to be able to resist this completely unfair and one-sided algorithmic extraction from the most desperate people, really. And AI comes into this because, you know, whatever the algorithm that they're using, at some point, a human wrote the 1.0, say Uber 1.0 algorithms of how is the pay going to work. It's a very large data set. And so they can now train AI algorithms to find even more vulturous, you know, even worse price gouging, both on the passenger and driver side. It is an incredibly strong technology for a large data set, and they're going to use it to increase their profit margins and really make the service worse for really everybody else.
And one of the issues that the companies have argued is that they would provide insurance for the drivers, workers' comp, and because what happens is if drivers don't have insurance, health insurance, they end up at a public hospital, the taxpayer ends up paying. And they promised in this bill that they spent $200 million passing that they would provide health care for their drivers. What is the reality as far as what these companies promised Uber and Lyft?
This was Prop 22, you know, voted on by the residents of California. Everybody that voted for it, or a poll said that people voting for Prop 22 thought it would make better wages for drivers and a better situation for drivers. That's why they voted for it. That was what the $200 million went to, was these advertisements all over the airwaves saying, like, you know, vote for this. It's a proposition for drivers. It's exactly the opposite. It creates just a bare bones system that has things like, you know, if you are above a certain threshold, you can get health care. Very hard threshold to actually meet. And all of the other guarantees that are in the bill, some of them aren't even being implemented. They're there in the bill, they're a matter of law, but they're not actually carried out. For example, one that comes up a lot is, there is in the bill a requirement that no driver can be deactivated for no good reason. You know, there's supposed to be some kind of a standard for if a driver is not a good driver or doing something bad. There are terrible drivers out there. And a passenger alleges such, there's a process before they get deactivated. That just doesn't happen. Anybody can basically, I feel bad saying this, I don't want anybody to know this, but any passenger can get a driver deactivated. You just say they were drunk or they were abusive or something like that, And at the very least, they can't sign on for a day, and maybe that's okay, an investigation needs to be done. But really, mostly long-term, you're not likely to be able to be reactivated onto the platform. There used to be communication between Uber and Lyft and drivers over this. They've basically stopped responding to all legal requests, and that's a law they wrote. They wrote that into the law, and they're not following the law they wrote, so.
And what about enforcement? Robinson,
What enforcement, yeah.
So I guess this is like not kind of larger picture related to enforcement. I would take it a step further, especially with Prop 22. I've spoken with many drivers who have spoken to the fact that a Prop 22 banner was programmed into the actual Uber and Lyft apps, spreading misinformation, as Jason said, saying that Prop 22, tell your driver, it was something along the lines of, Prop 22 will help your driver, tell them about Prop 22. So now Uber and Lyft are now engaged not in just making technology, but making technology with a specific message, a specific political will they want to enforce. And they're using passengers as one way to enforce that, right? They're saying, hey, passengers, tell your driver about Prop 22. And this is a part of a larger, very intentional war. And what do I mean by that? Many drivers spoke to, back in 2013 when they started, how they would get 80% of the take, and it was much more manageable. You could feed your family better, you received more money. But over time, they describe as that percentage shrunk. And now I believe some drivers say it's at 40 to 50% each company. And now you have, for example, in terms of AI, you have Waymo taking over Market Street, which is a market that drivers are exclusively left out of. This is an avenue that Waymo has access to. They share access to the city with drivers, Waymo does, except this one specific corridor. So what is going on here? There's a specific political intersection here that allows Uber and Lyft to engage in direct class warfare with drivers. They're taking more and more money from drivers. They're making it easier to get fired. They're utilizing passengers as weapons again in this war, not only turning the drivers against each other, but turning passengers against the drivers. And now Waymo is here. And so it's clear that Uber and Lyft, over the course of their existence, has tried time and time again to eliminate the driver out of the equation by putting them into more desperate and precarious conditions. And of course, the main way they do this, and I think the driver, the rideshare driver, is a textbook example of, for anyone who's read socialist theory, Marxist theory of isolation. They are literally physically isolated. They're not going to a workshop floor like they used to. They're going in their car, and they're in their car for 14 hours. They're not going to a classroom or a school where they can see their other coworkers and colleagues. They're isolated in a car, in an individual unit for 14 hours a day, extreme atomization. So I think what we have here is a complete just class warfare from Uber and Lyft leveraging political mechanisms such as propositions and legislature to achieve this warfare. And of course they're not going to, these rules are not going to be enforced. They're too powerful for these rules. They can just pay off politicians and lobby and things like that. They don't have to play by any rules. No capitalist rules do not exist for the capitalist class. They always say a fine is as a class is an attack against the poor, because $1,000 fine for something against for someone like Jeff Bezos doesn't mean anything, but it means the world for a single mother or a struggling family or anything like that.
Yeah, I have another, I think, a pretty good example, the biggest one that we talk about a lot, in how the law just does not apply to Uber and Lyft. There was a period of time between 2016 and 2020 when we were officially employees, and we were supposed to be getting paid overtime, time for use of our car, all of that. That was the law. It's pretty straightforward. Uber and Lyft did not do that. They didn't pay overtime, they didn't pay out breaks or anything like that. It was one of the most blatant cases of wage theft you could imagine. And that's in court right now. If you add up all the money owed, it is the third largest lawsuit in American history, and you've never heard of it. Because that's their PR team. That's all the money that they stole. It's on the order of tens or maybe $100 billion. That goes into PR, it goes into politics, it goes into the machine that works well, for the capitalists, for the investor group behind these companies. This is what's been our major thrust for a while as Rideshare Drivers United, is just getting that information out there, getting lawmakers, anybody, especially drivers out there, to know that we're owed billions and billions of dollars, and it's being used against us every day that we don't get it back. The court case will wrap up soon. It's something, this should be, in the news quite frequently, but the system does not work as maybe we sometimes imagine it does. And so the theft is just out there for now. We will be getting some money back. How much money we actually get back that was stolen from us depends on people knowing about this and taking action. And I think it's unfortunate, but if I was to lay this out in front of some elected officials, their reaction wouldn't be, there's a group of people here who has been wronged. It would be, here's a very profitable corporation. I don't want to be on the wrong side. I don't want to challenge Uber. You see a lot of that, especially on the state level in California. Our politicians do not want to take up this fight, and we need to force them to. Unionization being the primary way that I think is available to us to create another power base.
And the public, as I was mentioning, are paying for this beside the driver, because if there's a wreck and the driver is injured, they end up at a public hospital, and the companies are not paying for it because they don't provide the health care for the workers. There should be single payer for everyone, all workers. But the other issue is slave labor conditions. 8 hours, 12 hours driving, living in your car. What the hell is going on in this country?
Paying for your own gas.
Paying for your own gas, paying for your own car. You're working for the auto company that you borrowed the money for a car. I mean, the system is against the workers, against the people who are doing this work. The other issue is the introduction of Waymo cars. It used to be regulation in local communities of automobiles, and the legislature, Democratic Party majority, supermajority, allowed Uber and Lyft to bring in as many cars as they want. In fact, maybe you can talk about the expansion of these autonomous vehicles, which are unlimited, the environmental issues. I mean, there's no protection for the people of San Francisco, the workers of San Francisco, of these automobiles.
Yeah, I mean, I think Waymo is just, as I've described, Uber and Lyft have progressively played less and less to the driver over the last 10 to 12 years. I think Waymo and the introduction of driverless cars is the next step in that class warfare, right? You completely lock out a population out of a certain market. There's evidence of propaganda painting drivers as brutes and assailants to promote some kind of false idea of safety. But in reality, you are much safer in a human car over an AI car. And what's interesting about these robo-taxis is that accountability goes essentially out the window, right? Because if an accident happens when you're in Uber, that's a driver. There's something that you could link the accident to, or there's a level of accountability. There's a structure for accountability there. Who's going to take accountability when a Waymo car gets in an accident, right? Or when a Waymo car messes with a bus driver. And I mentioned bus drivers because this is not only an issue for private sector drivers, such as rideshare drivers, it's an issue for public transit drivers. The DSA has spoken to both sides of the aisle in terms of drivers, and both agree that for different reasons, Waymo is a problem. It's breaking laws, it's taking up space. I mean, the amount of videos I've seen of the Waymos going into the lots at night and honking because they can't figure out how to park around each other and waking, local residents up. It is not simply just this is a San Francisco issue, this is a local issue. And as you mentioned with environmental destruction, it's just escalating to a point where it's almost overwhelming. I wouldn't be surprised if one felt overwhelming after hearing all this information. All this money that's owed, plus Waymo, plus the horrible conditions that these drivers face. It's quite frankly very exhausting and very overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think that when you get this information just as it is and as we're laying it out here, it is pretty depressing. I want to say the other side of it, though, which is the drivers are aware. This isn't hidden from the drivers themselves, and they are very willing to come together. It's a unionization is tricky, you know. We're putting union cards out there, but what might seem overwhelming, there is also the overwhelming force of essential workers on the other side, if we're organized, right? We're really the overwhelming force here, right? If people just didn't get into their cars and drive for Uber and Lyft for an hour, right? That would send ripples, right? That would be amazing. That would shut everything down. It's a matter of deciding what we do, and the union goes to that. That's what will help us organize our time rather than an app organizing our time.
One of the issues that needs to be addressed is privatization of public resources, because in San Francisco we have better, actually, mass transportation than many other cities and communities around the country. However, it's under attack. There's a massive deficit, and they don't want Uber and these other companies to pay for that, the billionaires. They want the homeowners or working people to pay for it. And what has happened is at the airport with autonomous vehicles, that's going to cut out the drivers. Means that workers aren't going to be taking, and the public aren't going to be taking trips to the airport by public transit. They'll go by a car, private company, private profits. So we, the people, the working people, have financed our public transportation system, and it's being undermined actually by Uber and Lyft and these autonomous vehicles who are being used instead of public transit. Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's no coincidence that, I mean, it doesn't take much to know that, like, the airport is one of the most vital markets for drivers. So now, here in San Francisco specifically, drivers have been pushed out of Market Street, which, in my humble opinion, should only be for public transit, but they've been pushed out of that market, and now they are now attempting to push drivers out of a market that was completely theirs, or public transit. But now automation is going to destroy both. And I think that's a huge threat, right? Because a lot of drivers will always talk about, you know, they're always waiting at the airport. The airport's their biggest moneymaker. And so now they're going to be pushed out of that. And the public doesn't know any better. They think, oh, a robot car can now pick me up from the airport. How great, right? And the public loves it. The amount of, like, as far as I've seen, the public support, obviously there's a lot of public opposition as well, but there is amongst the you know, normal folks, there's especially in a city like San Francisco with so many tech bros and so many, you know, tech financiers, you know, and this view that technology will save us all, this California ideology as it's called, you know, it's like, wow, Waymo's great, it's the next step, you know, who cares about the drivers? This is the future, right? And I think that, again, just like with Market Street, I think the airport is the next step, and then over time, Waymo will just continue to eat up more and more of markets that were both managed by public transit and Uber and Lyft drivers. So it's a huge systematic push from companies like Waymo, Uber, and Lyft to just completely push these drivers out. And these drivers are not only going to need to unionize, they're going to need some form of political structure, political guidance, a political North Star to fight this, because this isn't bigger than just drivers, right? This is affecting all types of workers, and drivers are just one very essential component for sure, but one component in a bigger puzzle that needs to be utilized if we were to take on these huge systematic attacks against drivers and workers in general.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about how interesting it is to take a Waymo, I've done one once. It is interesting for a minute. It's kind of cool for a minute. You know, this is
all right.
We have this. I think we all experience this pretty frequently. You know, there's a new technology. It's very cool and useful, and then enshittification happens maybe a year down the line, or less than that, right? When Uber and Lyft came out, pretty good deal, right? Down the line, they need the profits back, and suddenly it's really not that great anymore. We have the scooters when they were introduced. I thought those were a decent idea for a while. Now they're just clogging up traffic. They're on the side of the road. A lot of things that are cool early on, you know, they don't want to put the money back into the business model. They just want to corner the market, you know? And I think we do kind of know this as especially this petri dish of San Francisco, this test market for so many of these new technologies. we are a little bit appropriately jaded. When we see something that's new and interesting, we do, and this is the right response, we say, what about down the line? How is this going to be actually part of our life later, you know? And so the experience of the Waymo is part of that. Now they're, you know, relatively clean and stuff, but they're not going to stay that way. But also, what will that mean for the local economy, stepping out from just the driver who's becoming unemployed, right? My day used to look like I go drive, I come home, you know, when the pay was a little bit better, I go to Escape from New York Pizza, I go to Sunset Liquors, I get a beer and a pizza, maybe go to Amoeba Records, and I buy myself a Laserdisc, you know? And this is all money that circulates in the local economy. With the pay being less and less on the driver's side, less of that happens. You know, this cut that Uber and Lyft take that gets bigger and bigger, that leaves the local community. With Waymo, that's just a hole in the bottom of the bucket. You know, that is just money that will be leaving San Francisco. Certainly jobs lost, but think about all the people who their family, you know, relies on that person, the job haver, but also everybody who they interact with economically in San Francisco. And we can't afford to be just losing money from the city through the transit sector to a private corporation that's really international capital.
And this raised another question because autonomous vehicles, trucks and cars, will lead to the loss of millions of jobs in this country. Millions of workers, our truck drivers, our delivery drivers, their jobs are going to be destroyed. Yet the California Public Utility Commission, there's nothing in approval of new technology about what is going to happen to workers. And we're talking in this, not just San Francisco, but nationally, millions of jobs. Is that an issue? Really, is that an issue that millions of people will lose their jobs in this country? Without a shorter work week, without protection for workers? What are workers going to do? And I think that that's really another question that needs to be addressed, because it seems the way the system is organized and the development of this technology, let's get rid of all the drivers and make some profits for these companies, more profits for Waymo and other companies.
I see this, well, let's start by acknowledging that this is a system we are going against, so that we are going to fight that system. We are going to develop an alternative system. We can't do this on an individual level. Steve, you mentioned earlier that this fight is not going to be an industry by industry. It's going to be a larger societal push. So I see this as a twofold fight. Number one, engaging workers across labor boundaries. What do I mean by that? So we need to get drivers talking to teachers. We need to get drivers talking to nurses, who then need to talk to truck drivers, who then need to talk to longshoremen. We need to stop acting like every union, we have to stop thinking as every union is a separate silo. Obviously, every work floor, workshop is going to have its own particular issues, but for bigger systematic issues like this, we need to engage the entire labor force, because ultimately, when everyone is replaced, there's going to be no distinguishing between a driver or a teacher. Everyone's just going to be replaced, so it doesn't matter. So ideally, we have to build a mass force, a mass political movement, and political is important here, to fight this, right? So that's a broader, industry to industry, connecting workers, connecting industries. Within those industries, we need to put workers at the forefront, and we have to engage with these workers in a way so that they can engage with each other about these issues. Because ultimately, a driver is going to know best about how they're being exploited. A teacher is going to understand best how they're personally being affected about this. We need to get these within industries, get drivers talking to each other about these issues, getting them to be less reactive and proactive, and thinking along the same lines as like what Jason was saying, where it's like we have to see each development in technology, see it ahead of time, and put drivers and workers at the forefront in every conversation whenever there's a new technological development, right? Because if we're talking about socialism or a world run by workers, we have to start putting that into practice. We have to actually start developing things for workers to actually engage with. Workers are already strapped for time. They're already hyper-exploited. So if we're going to do anything for them, we have to make sure it's worth their while. So we have to put them at the front and center of every conversation we have if we're going to engage with these issues practically and proactively, because we're not going to win by reacting we're going to win by thinking ahead and getting ahead of these systems and these billionaires and the owning class.
And in San Francisco, there was a long process of making market car free. And apparently that process was completely ignored by the billionaire mayor, Daniel Lurie, who basically intervened and said, we're going to have Uber and Lyft on the and autonomous vehicles, Waymo, on the streets in San Francisco Market Street. It seems that this whole idea of a city that is going to be walking more has been basically eliminated. Any thoughts on that?
That's true. Yeah. We see less and less of that. And it is, as you say, so market was public transit only, and then Uber and Lyft, the expensive Uber and Lyft are allowed to go there, the black service, and now the Waymo service, and none of this is something I would agree with anyway, I think it should be public transit only. But those layers are peeled back, by our billionaire class and mayor specifically,
I want to speak to kind of the political developments around this issue. So there's currently a campaign that the DSA is currently engaging with called Keep Market Street Moving. It is a coalition of various groups that are interested in this issue. This is a very local issue, and we are one of the coalition partners. And this is just one way we can engage with this issue. But ultimately, any engagement with this issue is going to fall flat if there's not the engine of workers pushing it. If you're not engaging with bus drivers, if you're not engaging with Uber and Lyft drivers, an issue that, because obviously, like, I believe in capitalism, we tend to emphasize the consumer, which obviously, like, we want a city that's accessible for all, San Franciscans. But ultimately, it's the people who make the city run that should be making the decisions, working with the consumer to kind of guide this development, not billionaire, Mayor Lurie, right? He's ultimately doing it to deepen his pockets, deepen the pockets of Uber and Lyft. And I think that any political campaign around that needs to center workers if we're going to actually have the effect that we want on the billionaires.
And there was just the Gateway project for those who are in San Francisco, which is going to be a warehouse built by Prologis, and Prologis is known as Amazon's landlord. It's probably going to be a big Amazon warehouse, and it's going to bring in 6,000 trucks a day into Hunters Point Bayview, further polluting that community, black and brown community, that poor working class community. So I think that the protection of the environment, all these trucks coming in, is not the best way to clean the environment in San Francisco. But for Amazon and these big companies, more profit. That's how they see it, I think. And that's, I think, what's driving the development of San Francisco. How can we make more profit, and how can we, in this case with Amazon, bring in non-union workers? So maybe we'll take some questions or comments.
Thanks very much. Two things I wanted to mention: false equivalence and environmental impact. When you have an automated vehicle, who's going to help somebody with a suitcase or 2 bags of groceries to get in, or a walker, et cetera, et cetera? Taxis, I learned as a kid in New York, have to take everybody anywhere they want in the city. What about people who you can't hail an automated or an Uber or Lyft? You have to have all the gear, and that discriminates very much against a whole category of folks, the vulnerable populations, the poorest, minorities, et cetera, who have less access or who don't want to participate in the whole surveillance economy. Also, in terms of environmental impact, it seems to me that there's a kind of a fragmentation of the service. All of the, as I understand it, the crash tests nationally were only about what happens to the people inside the car, but what about only recently are they considering what's happening outside? So, for example, if I were to fall down here, collapse from whatever, a heart attack, I would expect people would, there'd be some help. And the same on the street. What happens in a Waymo if I fall down on the sidewalk with a heart attack? Is the Waymo going to say, oh, something's going on there, or there's a fight, or some social kind of connection? which a human driver might get out and help or make some noise or use, dial 911 for some help. So there's a whole social impact, including when that money goes out to the corporations instead of the city. My options as a non-user, fewer bookstores, fewer everything that I'm used to using, as well as also have a certain kind of a social impact as well. You don't run into people anymore. Nobody's on the street. Everything's being delivered and so on. So those, I think, are really important. It isn't just the drivers and just even the workers specifically that I think are affected. It's all of society, not to speak of all of the other issues like climate changes, electricity and water, land use, and so on, which this technology is sort of sucking up. And we're even having to pay, there's an article in today's Chronicle about electricity rates going up because PG&E has to jack up their ability to offer electricity for the AI folks, and everybody else is going to have to pay for it.
Yeah, I think I misspoke a little bit. I meant to say more, obviously the consumer is important here and the larger societal impact, but in terms of like the organizing, like the behind organizing against it, that's what I meant to say. But you're absolutely correct in saying that, like, as someone with handicapped family members, what does happen in that case, right? And I'll even take it further, right? I've spoken to many drivers who, they're immigrants. A lot of drivers are immigrants. We have a lot of immigrants in California. So what if there's a language barrier? Now they can't use the app or things like that. Or you have to have a certain level of proficiency. So people who are technological proficiency to use the Waymo app, right? So those people are excluded. Or people who just don't want to use that service. There's just people who want another option that would prefer a train or a bus or walking. And you're right, and these data centers are going to pollute, they're going to raise electricity bills, they consume an unhealthy amount of energy. So it is going to take not only workers, organizing against this, but when workers do get a control of everything, it's going to take coordination with the public to figure out the best way to develop services that everyone can use, that's accessible to everyone. So we can go back to a time where you could see people walking on the street or, going to the local bookstore and things like that. And that these, I would take it even further, that these businesses would go out of business because now everything's automated or on Amazon or so on and so forth.
Yeah, and that human element that you brought up of helping somebody, maybe who fell down in the crosswalk or something like that, that's absolutely true. It came up earlier about what's going to happen with Waymos in an earthquake or a utility shutdown. They will paralyze the city and we won't be able to do anything. Are they going to put that in their statistics about their safety? Of course not, But safety, happens outside the car as well as in the car, just as you were saying. That's not something, when they're touting their safety statistics, they are not looking at that. They're not talking about cats and dogs either. I don't know if everybody here knows, but a Waymo ran over a cat recently, a beloved neighborhood cat, and a dog. So, their model, they don't think about these things the way a human naturally goes out to help other people and our animal friends.
I mean, we're already kind of seeing like a smaller form of this paralysis. I mean, anecdotally, I've seen Waymos stuck in the middle of Market Street, just literally blocking traffic and forcing cars to go around it. I've spoken to bus drivers who talk about how Waymos break every law in the book, how they block up traffic, how they block up their routes, make them run late. We're already seeing small pieces of this paralysis that over time are going to add up to, like you were saying, it's something like a catastrophe, like an earthquake. And especially as climate change ravages the earth, we're going to see more of these incidents. Is Waymo going to be prepared for that? No. They don't give a shit. They want to make as much profit as possible in as short amount of time as possible, and they're not thinking about the larger societal impacts. They are only thinking about the impacts it has on their wallet, and they're going to engage in class warfare against all workers, drivers, and society as a whole to make it there, and they don't care how they get there, and they're just not going to stop unless we put a stop to them.
Yeah, looking back more than 100 years, the common carrier laws, which evolved to railroads and airlines, but also the taxi, metered medallion taxi system, were from the start consumer protection laws. designed to require, even then, before anybody was talking about surveillance pricing, there was a recognition of the danger and the need to prohibit personalized, potentially predatory pricing, and to prohibit redlining before that term was created. So you have a metered taxi that's going to charge the same rate no matter where you're going. They can't charge you more because you're going to a poor black neighborhood. They can't redline certain neighborhoods. They're legally obligated to take you anywhere. But there's also a guaranteed price so the driver knows what they're getting. I guess part of my question is, how do you get it across to the public how much they are losing in losing the availability of a common carrier service? But the people who aren't here are the taxi drivers, and I guess my question really is where that stands. I was at hearings at City Hall, some years ago where the taxi drivers were just pleading for some relief from what was being done to them. And you've got the people who took out a second mortgage on their house to pay $500,000 for a medallion because they were being made a promise about a system that they were buying into. And that was just completely ignored. Are the taxi drivers, is that just complete collateral damage? And what, if anything, are the rideshare gig worker drivers doing? What's the level of collaboration or the path for collaboration with those people who've got their money sunk in the taxi medallions?
Rideshare Drivers United, one of our North Star as an organization is the New York Taxi Alliance. And we communicate with them. They're very effective politically. And look broadly at people who work in transit to address those issues. What the present state is of what we want for a law here in California would be to go back to, I think what you're describing, a rate card. You get paid a certain amount for a mile and a certain amount for a minute. And that's the deal. A living wage, something that beats a living wage, something like that. So we really do want to go back to what that was. Like that the price model that they have right now is incredibly discriminatory, and it just hides as an algorithm. And so people can say, it's not a person discriminating, but it ends up in as bad or worse outcomes. When the AI shows up and they really start putting that in there, it's going to be so much worse. And they probably are a little bit already. A flat rate, a common carrier concept, yes, we would absolutely go for that.
No notes.
So one thing that I think that I see is that a lot of all business, all industries are going to private-public partnerships. And if they're and then we're competing as workers on a global scale, those jobs that it can be facilitated by technology and these things, and then our local jobs, restaurant, taxi services, ride shares, are going to go to these automated systems. So I'm wondering if if these services are being funded by public dollars and what percentage those are.
The general economic environment that allowed Uber and Lyft to take market share, and that was what they call the zero interest rate period, right? So the federal government wanted to basically give money to the private sector and create innovation, This is how it was possible for Uber and Lyft to undercut the taxi services and the existing infrastructure, right? When we have discussions about what the Fed rate is, that's something we should discuss more, because that is, the Fed is there to support asset holders. It's for capital. This is maybe an abstract answer, but like creating the business condition for these services to undercut public institutions, that happens at a federal level as well as with particular laws in different places. I don't know who the CFO for Uber is, no. Okay. Kamala Harris's brother-in-law, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats, you can't blame Trump for what's going on in California. I mean, California is Democratic mayors, Democratic legislator. Democratic governors. It's the Democrats. In fact, the majority of all the Democrats voted for this project in San Francisco to allow Amazon to operate. All the Democratic supervisors, all of them voted for that. The Democratic legislator is allowing these companies to do what they're doing. They're allowing Waymo to operate basically the way it wants to operate. That's the Democratic governor who appoints the members of the California Public Utility Commission, who one of them was a counsel for Waymo. So we're talking about the complete capture of regulatory agencies, which are supposed to be for the public. As far as private-public partnerships, in San Francisco, they're all over the place. What should be done by public workers is done by private workers at $18 an hour, $20 an hour. How do you live in San Francisco on $20 an hour? You can't live in San Francisco. So you're talking about slave labor conditions in San Francisco. That's what you really have. And it's like this Skyway project. Prologis, they're going to bring in workers to work at this Amazon facility. How much are those workers going to be paid? They're going to have to commute. They can't afford to live in San Francisco, or they'll live in their cars. Is that the future for workers? Slave labor, living in your car and working at a factory in San Francisco, a warehouse? This is what we're talking about as far as, the structure of San Francisco and what's going on nationally. I mean, this is a continuation of what's going on nationally and internationally.
So I actually wanted to share an example of public-private partnership from a few months ago in relation specifically to RDU. But I will just start with the general. This is what neoliberal capitalism looks like. This is a trend that's been happening, throughout all of capitalism, but especially since the Reagan days. And Jason, feel free to correct me on any details I miss, but in...
Carter.
Yeah.
Neoliberalism started under Carter, but yes.
There you go. But around the weekend of August 30th, basically what had happened was that Newsom, SEIU, and the Uber and Lyft corporations got together. They saw RDU's amendments to AB 1340, which is a bill that's going to allow Uber and Lyft drivers to collectively negotiate. They said, no, we don't want to do those. Forget your amendments. These amendments were to make the union bill have more bite, to have more teeth, to, if you want to go into detail about the specifics, if you can.
Sure, yeah, the bill recently, AB 1340, that allows us to unionize, that in toto is a good thing, but the devil's always in the details. Rideshare Drivers United wanted 7 different amendments, 7 things added to it that would be improvements. We know how snake-like Uber is and how they're going to use their lawyers to attack this clause or that clause. So we suggested 7 amendments. In Sacramento, we went to a hearing on it, and they suggested that these were going to be introduced into the bill. At the last minute, they weren't. And not only that, but at the last minute, language was added to the bill to make it hard for Rideshare Drivers United, which is the only rideshare driver-led union in California, to not be in contention to be the union that supports drivers in California. They added something literally over midnight. So I'm driving up to Sacramento one day, with other RDU people, trying to get in the door and say, look, don't pass this. Please don't pass this. Unfortunately, the amendments were not added. The RDU they at least attempted to exclude us from being in the running because we are the more militant union. And at the same time, a bill was passed to let Uber and Lyft pay a lot less for insurance. They used to have a great deal of insurance for drivers. Now they don't anymore. So it was a real sweetheart deal.
I believe the exact number was millions in insurance to $30,000 to $60,000 in insurance, according to one article. And you want to know what Governor Newsom said? This is a day when labor and industry came together to make a deal. And it's probably one of the most shit deals you'll ever see in your life.
Not a thing. Labor and industry coming together to make a deal. It's just not a concept that we should let our politicians get away with.
With a big, bright smile on his face.
Yeah, so I did have some slides. I didn't bring them. It was just pictures of a protest that Rideshare Drivers United, Gig Workers Rising, California Gig Workers Union all got together at an AI conference where we knew people from Uber, some of the AI people in Uber were going to be speaking at this AI conference. You know, we showed up and we said, look, you need to put workers in that room. You can't just have a conference about AI and not have anybody representing labor in there. You know, we tried to push that forward and we tried to get that message out there. Basically, what we got in return was people entering and leaving this conference would just stop and laugh at us and take pictures. That's who we're talking about, a negotiation between those people who look at people who are advocating for themselves, for their families, for their communities, and think it's quaint. I don't know. I mean, maybe what they're looking at is looking at these people and saying, hey, look, they're talking about how little they're paid. That's money that we're keeping. That's good. And that's why they're laughing, because they're laughing all the way to the bank. You know, they wouldn't be wrong to think that. But if we let our politicians get away with the concept that you can be on one side of that or the other or between them, that's just not true. They're laughing about the fact that they're stealing from workers. I don't see how you can go out and say there was any kind of a triumph there in allowing this kind of middle ground concept that did end up with a very weak labor bill and a cut in what Uber and Lyft have to pay to keep the streets safe.
And I think what you're did you?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, you look at San Francisco, the budget now, they're saying they have an $800 million budget deficit. What is that going to mean to the working people, the people of San Francisco, the public? It means that public services that we have are going to be cut. There was just a murder at San Francisco General Hospital. And the mayor, Lurie, was MIA. I mean, it's amazing. There's a murder of a worker at San Francisco General Hospital and not a word from the mayor of San Francisco. How can that be? Isn't he the mayor of San Francisco? Isn't he responsible for all the people? Why? Because they're cutting staff? Because people need health, mental health, they're not getting it? They're being turned away? UCSF is turning people away from emergency services, or they have to spend a day and a half getting a bed at UCSF. Our whole system is being destroyed in front of us. And the solution is not to go to Pacific Heights, to these billionaires who are profiting from AI by exploiting drivers. The solution is to cut services, public services, which we need as a society and as a people. So that is, I think, part of the contradiction. The richest city in the world, and people are dying in the street. The richest city in the world, and you can't get mental health care. Richest city in the world, and they're cutting the schools. There may be a teacher's strike because the teachers can't afford to live here, and they're saying we're going to shut schools. This is San Francisco. This is San Francisco with all the wealth that we have here at the top, and that's really a structural problem that's not being addressed. Our society and our system is threatened. So we're going to have to, I see, wrap it up, and I want to thank the...
Yeah, just to kind of leave it on an optimistic note, after interacting with these drivers for the past few months, it has been some of the most life-changing experiences of my life. And I say this because it's clear that these workers are hungry for more. When they're talking about their wage claim, they're talking about Waymo, they're talking about how much they have to struggle. They are clearly desperate for more. It took me 2 years of reading theory and understanding socialism to break away from the Democrats. It takes one conversation for these drivers to do that. They don't need to read some fancy book. They see it and they experience it with their own eyes. These drivers are organizing, these drivers are hungry, and it is our responsibilities as activists in our community, socialists, principled, political people, people of conscience who want a better world, to reach out to these people and make sure that their calls don't get ignored. And we're going to work with them. We're going to sit with them, and every day we're going to sit with them through every battle that they go through to make sure that they're not alone. Not only that, to make sure that they win, to make sure that at the end of the day, whether in 100 years, 50 years, however long it takes, however long we struggle, we will build the better world that these drivers and all workers across the world deserve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll have our next panel now. Thank you for your contributions. So, so our next panel is going to be on the struggle of tech workers and some of the issues, some of the issues that they're facing. And Neil Shah is one of the workers who is going to be coming up talking about his experience, and also Ashley Gjøvik, who is was an Apple worker introducing technology into the workplace, and she's going to be joining us by Zoom. So Neil and Ashley, if you're on, she should be on.
It's Steve.
Okay, great. So welcome to the panel, and here we're at the center of technology, the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, and talking about the reality for tech workers. And we're first going to start with Neil Shah, who is a tech worker who worked in startup, and some of the experiences that he had as a startup worker in San Francisco in tech. So welcome, Neil.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Steve. So I think it would help to understand a bit of my background before I start talking, because I am formerly one of the people that I guess we're currently resisting against. I worked at an AI startup that was backed by Y Combinator and seed funding from a lot of prestigious venture capital funds. And before that, I worked at I interned at a hedge fund. I've kind of had an interesting path where I'm looking for being on the right side of history and fulfillment. And I started at the I started with two things that very much so weren't that. So I just graduated from college with a computer science degree, and I started off by working in finance because that was just the thing that math and computer science people do, and I never really thought about politics because I had the privilege of not doing that. When I went to the hedge fund, I was kind of frustrated that, why are some of the smartest people that I've met working on the problem of making rich people richer and making it possible for really wealthy people to make money irrespective of what happens with the market. That's the definition of a hedge fund. I decided to not go back to that arrangement in the form of a post-grad return offer, and I was looking for a way to fulfill my soul. Unfortunately for me, around the same time, I got an offer from, I got recruited by an AI startup with exactly that. It was an opportunity for me to save the world, one AI startup at a time. On paper, it looked really good. We were making things more efficient. For purposes of not going into details of specifically what we did, you can kind of just imagine the idea of making things more efficient sounds really good on paper to a naive, politically uninformed 21-year-old. So I ended up moving here in January to work full time, and I have been. Let's just say that 2 months ago I quit my job, and I'm now organizing full time with the Democratic Socialist of America. I think that something to be said here is the whole time I thought that I was in the right, and there was not a point where I thought, okay, I'm working with the bad guys right now, the whole time I was hoping to be on the right side of history, help the people that were struggling, and it was a very immersive learning experience, understanding how is it that people can be on the wrong side of history and think that it's okay. How is that people can be in support of institutionalized, venture capital or institutional regulatory measures such as the safety and alignment teams at all of these AI companies. All of these people think that they're on the right side of history, but there's some very clear things that I've learned that I'd love to talk about on what led me to take that drastic measure to quit, and in hopes of both informing you guys about the 21-year-olds that are working at AI startups and those billboards that you see, that was that was me and my buddies. And also informing the people working in tech of the sheer responsibility that comes with, the centrality of our position in the SF economy and the global economy. So I'll leave it at that for now, but we can...
Okay, thank you, Neil. Okay, so thank you for your comments. So our next speaker is Ashley Gjøvik, and I met her around her struggle of environment and whistleblowing. She's an Apple worker. She was a manager at Apple, bringing in new technology, and she's gone through a struggle with Apple around her health and safety and the health and safety of other workers at a fab in the Peninsula, illegal fabrication laboratory, and also speaking out for workers in tech, which is a major question. Workers in tech should have the right to speak out, but the reality is not only do they break unions, workers are intimidated and afraid to speak out. So welcome to Ashley.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for having me. I also come and greet you guys from the world of tech workers with apologies. I'm so sorry for my part in a lot of the harm that's been caused. And I think that's a big reckoning some of us get to go through. I had a really rough time with whistleblower retaliation and resistance to labor organizing. In 2021, I was reporting environmental issues and safety issues at work, and was met with intense retaliation that caused me to kind of wake up of who exactly am I working for, and what is my part in all of this. And then it's been years of retaliation after that. And it's actually, there's been like one gift out of that, which is the perspective. So it's kind of question of what even was I doing with all of this? And this wasn't right. And I was part of the problem, and I want to try to make that better. And I really encourage any tech workers who are in that audience or who are listening to be open to that reckoning process, because I think a lot more of us need to go through it before anything's going to change. There's a lot of perks and there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that keep folks helping these companies do stuff that does cause harm. And I worked with them for a very long time. I worked for these huge companies for like over a decade. I worked for Apple for over 6 years. While I was at Apple, I was an engineering program manager. I even helped them and their legal team write their AI ethics policy for the company, which ended up being deeply ironic. And it wasn't until I started blowing the whistle on things that I saw a very different side of the company. And I realized that, and part of my complaints was about privacy related to AI development and data collection. And that ended up being what they focused on for their justification for firing me. And what I realized is these tech workers, I mean, you guys have talked about it a little bit of, we're kind of at the front line at these companies of trying to make sure that the right things happen and how stuff's going to be implemented. But because of that, these tech companies seem to engage in just really extreme harassment and retaliation and censorship of those employees because they're the front line. And so that's something I wanted to share for folks just to think about. Of, if you think about it, these companies know that these are the workers, that if they realize that stuff is being harmful, it's harming the community, it's being exploitive, and they were the ones to speak up to try to stop it, the companies would spend a lot of effort making sure that those employees don't speak up and don't stop it because they want that stuff to happen. So I ended up being kind of a whistleblower about environmental issues and toxic waste dumping, about censorship and NDAs. I got government decisions in my favor. It was really great. Actually, tons of progress for a company that normally is never held accountable for anything. But one of the things that when I was speaking out in 2021 that I thought would be fairly non-controversial ended up being that the reason the company said it would fire me, and one of the things they cited was this article, which is a Verge article, where we were complaining about how Apple was invading employee privacy in a number of ways. And one of the things I spoke out about was their data collection for AI development, which exploited workers. Like for me, I worked in software and hardware engineering, and there was an app on my phone that I was supposed to use 24/7, this company phone, that was taking constant videos and photos of me and with GPS and all this highly personal data. And I found it deeply concerning when I started reflecting on my role at the company and how they had been treating me and wondering, how much do they know about me? How much are they watching me? And realizing this app was such a huge invasion of privacy. And it was taking pictures also of people around me and me in places way outside of work, at home doing very sensitive things, undressed, medical appointments, something that's just such an extreme invasion of privacy. And so I was complaining about it also with, their history of censorship and retaliating against people and questioning it. And The company ended up saying that was the legitimate reason it fired me, is those posts I just showed you were a reason to immediately terminate a long-term employee, and said it was leaking. So I think I really want to stress that of these companies have like no moral compass with any of this stuff. And when it comes to AI development, they're saying, hey, we didn't fire her for reporting the toxic waste dumping or the labor organizing or the NDAs, even though they did, for sure they did. But they're saying we fired her because she leaked about us taking all these secret photos and videos of all of our employees. That was a secret. And they claim the photos of me were their property. They said I couldn't share the photos it was secretly taking of me, and said they owned the photos of my body taken in my home, which is not how the law works. I do have a JD. That's not how the law works. It's not a thing. And it's deeply concerning. And we had the actor union organizer talking at the beginning, and I was thinking about how the organizing that just happened, one of the things these companies, including Apple, was saying is they wanted to do AI scan. They wanted to do scans of the actors' faces and bodies and turn them into like this like AI hologram to use to create whatever TV shows or movies without even having to involve the worker, the actor, and just how deeply surreal and disturbing that is. And then I want you guys to know that like these companies will also do this kind of thing, where they're not only like willing to take such insane surveillance of employees and gather all this really invasive data, but then claim like full ownership to those violations of our privacy and say we can't talk about it. And that's the kind of thing that they can also use to pressure employees to not speak out and not report stuff and not cause trouble, which is just so disturbing. And it was so hard also to get support on it, because a lot of people they don't want to leak too. They don't want to get in trouble, and the press doesn't want to talk about issues like that can be so disturbing. So I found fellowship in another Apple whistleblower. Thomas is a Siri whistleblower. He was one of the original folks who were working in Cork, Ireland, who exposed that Siri was secretly recording people's conversations. And that there was a huge like a $95 million settlement recently over this, a big lawsuit, government enforcement actions. But they did screenshots, and they exposed that when Siri was getting accidentally triggered on people's phones and watches, it was recording audio snippets of them at the doctor, talking to lawyers, talking with their family, having sex, stuff that's just deeply, deeply private. And this is customers. And then so the employees come forward because they're like, we don't want to review this. We don't want to participate in this. And this is deeply wrong. And they fought really hard. And it took them, they started coming forward, I think, in 2018. And it wasn't until 2025, just recently, that a criminal investigation was launched in France. So it's taken a really long time. And it's been hard to find fellowship of other tech workers who are willing to speak out and organize on this stuff. And so Thomas was a great friend, and he was able to get my story, even though I had trouble getting it covered in the US. I got good coverage on those photos that issue with that app in France and in Germany. But I just want, I want to push that forward of when tech workers want to push back on this kind of stuff, it can be extraordinarily difficult. They can struggle to find a voice or a platform in the United States. They can struggle to find a community to help support and amplify their voices. And they can meet extreme retaliation and just like that kind of deranged harassment from those huge tech companies. So while we know that they can be the front line, the companies know that too, right? So they have a lot of leverage. We write about each other's stories and try to support each other. And I also just kind of want to shine a light on that, though, of like these tech workers, we don't have unions. We don't have like real employee organizing. And when they try, these companies will do everything they can to sabotage it and cause division and cause lots of issues. So it's really difficult for us to try to support each other's voices in a meaningful way. So I just want to show that example of like, we're at least like blogging about each other's disclosures and trying to get people to know. And I want to show the picture in that right, this public article. I had pictures from that app, and like that has pictures of me like in the backseat of a Lyft. So my phone is taking pictures of my Lyft driver and that person's car and uploading that stuff to Apple, and then Apple's using that for AI development. There's pictures of me in the bathroom watching my face. There's pictures of me, stuff that's, you would not want your employer gathering that information about you, let alone using it for commercial product development and then saying you can't tell anyone what they're doing. And that's the kind of stuff that these companies are using to try to develop these products, especially when they're cheap and they don't want to pay for proper data collection. So it's almost like an extortion of these tech employees, that if they want to come forward and they want to expose some kind of unethical practice, like these companies are kind of doing a NXIVM sort of collateral thing with some of these employees, and it's really disturbing. And there's been very little, if no, government intervention so far on any of this. And I think the community is mostly unaware, mostly because of all that secrecy. So what I want to offer in this presentation is a bit dry, but I was a program manager. I managed projects and programs and implementing processes. And I wanted to speak to like the desk workers who might be watching this video or who are in the audience, the people who might not know a straightforward path of like, how can I organize around this? How can I help, build a better community around workers who have to deal with AI implementation? And so I just want to tell you, like, when your boss comes and says something about deploying some kind of AI, how you can make sure that you're involved in that process, your coworkers are involved in that process, you give feedback. And I think if we can get people working in industries that aren't as insane as these tech companies to kind of normalize employee engagement in this process, it would help the tech workers too. Because then you can point to like well-established practices where employees have voices and are engaged in the process. And that hopefully then the workers can point to it in the tech companies and be like, see, like at the San Francisco government, these employees can do it in a way that's not illegal. What you're doing is illegal, like stuff, So help create kind of a norm and expectations about how this kind of stuff should work. So like if you're a desk worker and your managers all of a sudden want to deploy some kind of AI, you have technical people that are building it, but you're going to have people on the ground who understand how whatever it is going to be deployed and used. And I think it's really important to make sure that those workers are involved in the strategy discussions. And you can do it in a very non-confrontational way and just, give case studies of like, hey, this specific thing, here's some examples where it'd be very helpful for people who actually implement this or oversee it to provide feedback in the early planning part of this project. And if you can do that, you can get your voice in from the very beginning. And remind them that if you're doing some kind of services where you're engaging with people, whether it's clients or residents, that the people who do that work have information that other people don't. They know what's actually happening. They know when someone asks for A, they're actually asking for B. They know if there's issues in a specific location or function, that comes with a lot of baggage or additional complexity. The stuff that can't be, even if they want to train that into AI, they can't unless they get that information from the employee. So I think really making sure that the management, operations teams all understand when certain employees and teams need to be involved with this kind of development and oversight, and how to make sure that you're gathering all that information and have a QA process to make sure that those folks are also looking at how it operates when it's actually used and making sure it is hitting those points that need to be met. And if it's not, how they can flag issues. And, that's workers weaving themselves into these processes where even well-intentioned managers might think AI means it's going to be a lot easier because we just won't use humans. They like that. It's just easier for them. So like reminding them that's not a thing generally ever at this point. A lot of this is just automation, but it still needs human checkpoints, needs reviews and verification. So weave that into reviews and planning sessions, one-on-ones with managers, to making sure you're involved and that you and your teams and your coworkers are always part of the process. And identifying limitations, complexity, flagging issues, flagging areas of complexity, high-risk areas. So like this is hosted by the San Francisco government. So if you have San Francisco government employees who work in public works or something where you're receiving complaints from residents, those are kind of things where you can't just automate all that. You're going to need humans that are involved in the design of the process and checkpoints and reviewing things and escalating things. So part of that might just be people learning a little bit about program management, that you can diagram workflows to share with managers or teams to make sure that they understand where the technical teams need to make sure that humans are always involved. And then complaints and feedback systems. So make sure that there is, they have a new product have a listening session, show it to people, make sure they're taking their feedback, implementing corrections, making sure there's a way to track issues that go to their teams that can actually fix stuff. Again, there's just this horrible tendency with executives where they hear AI and they think they can skip all of the normal project planning, but they can't. So like just reminding them of that. I'll have these slides on my website too. You can share the slides with them. I'll do a nice toned down one without any of the whistleblower stuff. And you can just show them the project management stuff. And then beyond just that normal integration in the planning process and deployment, put AI stuff in your bargaining agreements if you have a union, or if you're trying to form a union, put it there. Like anything you think would be relevant for your team, it would be great to have that as like a contractual right or obligation, depending on whatever you're asking for. Making sure that anti-retaliation policies specifically address AI. Because that's another thing. They want to say AI is this exemption to all the rules, but it's not. So make sure that there's policies specifically protecting complaints and issues there. And then work with elected representatives. There's a lot of legislation right now, bills they're trying to pass about AI. It's a great time to offer comments and go to hearings and have your voice heard. And know that a lot of tech workers would like to, but could get fired for even going to a hearing, even if that's illegal, you know? So there's a lot of censorship going on from other folks. So if anyone can help fill the gap and make sure that their voices are heard and the community's voice is heard is huge and greatly appreciated. So again, as like on behalf of tech workers, like please help us too. You know, I think there's a ton of tech workers who do want to do the right thing. And if they're not fully awoken to the kind of their role in the problem, they would be greatly enabled to actually speak up more or have more courage to raise issues if there's existing norms in the community around ethical AI and more protections. And they might not be able to be involved in trying to advocate for bills that would provide protections, but maybe some of you folks could, you know? And so then we're working together as a holistic community where people are, you know, advocating where they can and trying to hold the line and internally, if they're the kind of internal role, but we're all helping each other try to build a better framework for all of this because we can't do it alone. And I think the more that these different these kind of vectors for how this stuff can be misused, if we're not ensuring that we're trying to support worker voices and power from each and every vector around it, you know, these companies are just going to find those fracture lines and those vulnerabilities and exploit it. So just have each other's back on all of this. And so, yeah, again, I'm sorry for my role in a lot of the problems. I spent a lot of time being a problem, and I'm trying to reckon for it. And I also just want to offer that warning again, too, of I don't think that the community is fully aware of just how problematic the treatment is of the tech workers if they want to speak up, especially about AI. It's extremely common for AI-related complaints to be considered leaking, to be considered confidentiality violations, saying that whatever the leaking was protected as some kind of product development, regardless of what it is that's being complained about and escalated. So that's something that could really help tech workers is to get more protections for whistleblowers and just avenues to raise concerns and engage with the community.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. So maybe we'll open it up, or Neil, did you want to say something?
I think one of the things that was interesting for me to learn about in knowing that there is, you know, in theory and like a good way to use AI, and learning why that's not happening. So like I want to clarify that like in theory I am not like anti-AI completely. Like I think there are lots of you know, if you guys heard of AlphaFold, it's an example that's brought up over and over again where it's a model that you know, I'm not a biology person, but it goes from amino acid sequences to predicting the protein fold structure, and a lot of vaccines were direct products of this. And the thing about AlphaFold is it was run on a laptop. There are very controlled, like specific models that were made for this purpose by scientists at Google DeepMind. Like these are, so you know, the notion of like I think what the problem is right now is the corporatization and commercialization of AI, and the path that OpenAI, Google, Meta, like these big oligarchs have taken as a result of the venture capitalist model. So I'll say a bit more about that. Like, if you guys have, for those of you that don't know what venture capital is, it's a form of investment that came up in the late 20th century, where firms that needed more innovative ways, like they wanted to do something more innovative, but they couldn't get the stability from a normal bank loan. There's venture capitalists that invest in them, because the idea is if you shoot out 100 investments and one of them blows up, you'll still have a positive average return. So this is the form of investing that leads a lot of AI research and a lot of AI startups nowadays. Probably most of them, right? I think the path that AI has taken is, and because I said earlier, why is it that we're not doing AI the right way with, like what Ashley was talking about, where like people-driven, like going down to the workers and seeing like, okay, what do you guys need, and then building what they need, or why is it, and why is it right now we have ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, where it's sort of an everything model, where it just does everything. And like forget about scientific advancements or whatever. Like we need a model. They're building models that do everything, and the reason is because in a venture capitalist or capitalist economy, the incentive is to make a model that does everything because you're going to make the most money that way, And I think realizing that. We were talking earlier about Uber, and I think Uber is a great example of a venture capitalist company where they actually operated at a loss until 2023 for the first like a couple decades of their existence, and they it was in theory like not allowed to have a privately owned taxi company. But what they did is they framed themselves as a marketplace where they're connecting. They're a software company where they're connecting drivers to riders, and they framed themselves as a software company, and they took the venture capitalist structure where just give us a bunch of money, pile billions of dollars into us, and we will succeed, and that's how Uber got to where it is right now, and how it could circumvent all these laws. We talked a little about the lobbying towards Prop 22. The lobbying towards Prop 22, that money came from venture capitalists. Like Uber is I'm really glad we talked about Uber, because I think that's a great example of what is wrong with venture capital. And I think so. To tie back into AI now, AI startups like the one I worked for are all funded by venture capital as well, and the purpose is to like at the core of it, whatever altruistic purpose the founders may have, or the workers may have, at the end of the day, you have to oblige to the venture capitalists that give you your money, and there's no altruistic at the end of the day, it's bottom line. How do you make your company scale? And I think what's important to understand here is when the incentive is how do you scale as fast as you can. The corners that are being cut in order to get to that point, the people that are holding the bag are the workers and the working class. And you've seen this in AI. I think a great example of AI that we're all familiar with is when ChatGPT was released. Why is it that ChatGPT was released without any of us knowing about it? Like it was like for the year leading up to ChatGPT, it was like from their perspective, by the way. There was an earlier version of GPT that was only released to developers. But none of us, the average person does not know what that is. When GPT was released, and I've talked to a lot of my friends about this, even me, I was a computer science student at Yale, even I didn't know that ChatGPT was going to be released before it. Imagine the average person that doesn't know anything about tech. And all of these consequences are a direct, direct consequences of this being released before we are ready for it. The move fast, build fast, break things model of venture capital, who's the ones holding the bag here? It's the educators. It's the healthcare workers. It's all of us. And I think it's very important to understand there's a way that technology could have been implemented right, can be still implemented right, with worker solidarity and understanding who you're building it for, and having an intimate relationship, mutualistic relationship in that sense. But the reason why it's not happening is largely in part with this indoctrination, in the fact that founders and company owners have been indoctrinated to think that venture capital is the only solution, and it's not necessarily so much. And I want to reframe that actually. It's not so much that each of us are indoctrinated to think that venture capitalist is good. It's that each of us are indoctrinated into thinking it's the only option. And I think there's tons of cool stuff that's happening, and in terms of alternatives to worker-driven initiatives and stuff, and specifically for AI, one that I want to mention is called DARE, the Distributed Artificial Intelligence Research Institute, and the book that I had up here on the slides. I really want to shout out this book. It's called Empire of AI by Karen Howe. If you haven't read it or heard of it, I really recommend taking a look. That's the book that convinced me to quit my job. Before reading this book, I was convinced that my AI startup was going to save the world. After reading the book, I'm convinced that I'm the one that needed to be saved from. So, I think these two quotes are really good. They're from the book. I really like the second one because it's, I think AI sounds a lot scarier when it's seen as a magical box that can grow legs and then hack all of us or whatever. And there's lots to be said about the threat of AGI and how that's sort of propagandized in the news right now, where we're talking a lot about why there's no regulation for these AI companies, and it's largely because of, hey, if you regulate us, then AGI is going to happen, and we're all it's over. So there's a very methodical propaganda war that's being waged by these billionaires and these AI labs, and I think it's very important for us to come together right now, because the ground truth is there in terms of what we experience and what's really happening. In the labor exploitation that's happening right now, the environmental impact, our utility bills going up, these are all tangible things that are happening, and we only find out about it if we talk to each other. What's not going to happen is if we start fighting each other because of propaganda metrics from these AI companies that are saying, hey, AGI is going to happen because of this guy, or because of this country. I think what needs to happen right now is we need to focus on the impacts that are right in front of us, as opposed to deregulating for the purpose of I think lots to be said there, but I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, thank you. So, open it up for discussions, comments.
You spoke a bit about engaging with tech workers and how tech workers are kind of brought into this idea that, move fast, break things, we're going to change the world. And you even spoke to your own personal experience. And as a tech worker myself, I've had my, own personal experience with understanding tech and how it actually affects the world and capitalism and all these things. So, and this is for both panelists, I'm curious to what you guys think. What are some practical talking points or practical or ideas when you start engaging with a tech worker who is stuck in that ideology, which has a name? There's capitalism, neoliberal ideology. I like to call it the California ideology. Free market capitalism dawned with the aesthetics of the hippie era. Think Steve Jobs and Bill Gates early in their careers. So what are some practical ways, or what are some of the ideas that you engage with when you first start engaging a tech worker who maybe doesn't see it the same way, or you want to start getting them to see it that way?
It's a great question. And I'd say number one is like a case study. Pick a few solid case studies of it going very wrong. You know, the robot cars backing up and driving into stuff. That's a great visceral one, especially if you're in San Francisco and people see that. I think it's a great way to get them to look at something tangible in front of them and start talking about the consequences, where oftentimes the more theoretical stuff is harder to grasp because tech workers are dealing with a lot of cognitive dissonance. And they're dealing with a lot of, generally there's a lot of people stuck in kind of this, we're saving the world. This is great. We're not gonna ask any questions because it's very stressful if we start thinking more deeply about all of this. So I think if you pick a few case studies and can actually just start talking about stuff that's really well defined, and you could look at the articles and start dissecting it, I think it really does help the conversation. It's kind of like if it was an engineering problem, you kind of want to look at a dashboard of stuff, or you want to look at a failure analysis workflow. And I think remembering that oftentimes engineers just think in that way generally about the world too. So kind of catering that conversation to how they might naturally work through an issue.
I think also, I second everything that Ashley said. And also, yeah, like tech workers are in a bubble, like by definition. I was in a bubble. When I started talking to drivers or people that are actually like the ones that are currently being exploited, there's no theory that can like kind of justify that. It's like the way that we've been doing things have gotten us to this point. Screw any theory. This guy's in front of me telling me how he's working 16 hours a day. Like, I think there's I think tech people have a tendency to like Western rationalism to like they want to like try to think about everything in the way that like a math problem can be thought of. Math problem goes out the window when you start talking to workers and you go outside of your bubble. And workers right in front of you, but also learning about the history behind how AI systems were designed, the workers that got exploited in the global south to content moderate and label data. These are all things that are described in Empire of AI, and it's quite shocking, but it's really well laid out and it's digestible. And yeah.
Just to like lunch hour book club. Sometimes tech people are a whole mess, but they'll do like the book club where every month they're reading something to be connected with the world. Again, I'm so sorry for my participation in this nonsense. The tech companies create a really weird fascist mental bubble that all these people live in. But if you're gonna do your like monthly book club, pick stuff on this, that kind of history, the impacts of AI. And it kind of normalizes those conversations more while they're in the cognitive dissonance world, because you are doing your bougie book club while you eat your free salmon by the pond or whatever. But it allows people to start talking about this stuff because it's your book club. So like start dissecting it. I think you really have to just work with people where they're at, especially ones that haven't, you said like people that haven't even started on this, like work with them where they're at and start to seed those ideas in their head and start getting them to talk about it. And it's kind of a process, but I think the more that you can also have community around it with those ongoing conversations, then you start leading to more like group accountability and okay, now we all agree we don't like this, so what can we do about it? You could have employee even organizations. So like work within the corporate, like you have interest groups, create one about AI ethics, create a Slack group about it, I think it's just really kind of leaning into where people are at, but trying to open the minds and facilitate those conversations.
There are tech organizations, Tech Workers Alliance and others. And one of the things we would like, if you sign up, you can sign up online to this conference. We'd like groups of educators coming together, groups of healthcare workers coming together to have this discussion and debate. I mean, the purpose of our participation, having this, is not for discussion, but to change the world and to link people up and to defend our society and working people and all people. So I think if you're interested, contact us. And one of the problems in the trade union movement, the structure of our unions is they're business unions. And they're not structured around linking up the entire working class. So this debate about AI, as I said earlier, shouldn't just be a debate about one company or one industry or one union. All of us are affected by this. And I think this is one of the first conferences I know about having workers from different industries together to exchange and have a discussion. So we have to continue that. We need a debate in the working class in this country and internationally about AI and how it's affecting people, how it's affecting our future. and what it's doing to us and doing to our children and our families. This is something that we have to have. We have to organize. And I have to say, though, that in discovering the internet, it's a great thing to be able to have communication globally, to discuss and debate with people all over the world. What a fantastic thing for humanity. I mean, ideas, thoughts, art, to exchange that globally is tremendous. But right now, it's all shaped towards profiteering for the billionaires. That's what this is driven towards, not humanity, not human beings, but how you can make more profit. This is a system that is out of control, and these ideas of the fascist, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, they control the government. They have state power. They're saying there should be no regulation. Think about that. There should be no regulation of this technology, AI, which it can help people, but it can kill people, and it is killing people. So this is what we have to think about and have a discussion about. A debate, a discussion, this is what we want. We want a discussion and debate, and having it in a framework like here is a beginning, but it has to spread out, and we have to demand in our unions begin this debate. No one union, the Teamsters, are going to be destroyed with AI. At UPS, they're wiping out the workers. Thousands and thousands of workers are being ridden. In China, which is also using AI, they're eliminating workers in factories. They want to get rid of workers. They're eliminating workers on the docks in China. What are these workers going to do? This is a social crisis. If workers are eliminated, what do? The solution is a shorter work week. That should be a solution. Income of the profit should go to the working class and not to the billionaires. But those are structural changes that require political movement. They require an organized political movement. It's not going to happen by hoping that these politicians are going to do it, because right now that is not happening, and it isn't going to happen unless everyone comes together and says it has to happen. It's the same with healthcare. We're not going to get single payer unless everyone comes together and say we have to have it, and we have to shut things down to get it. That is what has brought change in this country, and that's what is going to move things. But having a discussion is, I think, an important, critical first stop. You have to have the discussion.
And then unionize. So I think it's so good to remember the history of Silicon Valley and these tech companies and the tech workers, that there were a lot of attempts to unionize these big tech companies, especially when they're doing semiconductor fab in the Valley in the 90s. There was a lot of health and safety issues. There was a lot of oppression and exploitation issues. And there was a real unionizing drive right before they offshored everything and tried to shut it all down. And we need to start it again and do it better and harder this time. I don't think anything's ever going to really change with these tech companies and the workers there unless they actually get real unions. They probably need to be independent as well. The big unions are just as captured by these huge tech companies as any other big company. And the ones that do have unions oftentimes are just outright violating antitrust laws with the way they're doing it. And it appears abusive. You don't really hear from these workers. What we need is like what we saw in the 80s and 90s, where you'd have the employee union representative who would speak on behalf of the workers publicly about public policy issues, about community issues. And then that empowered other workers to raise their concerns too and feel like they can, have a voice. I think unless we have some form of union again, something protected with these tech companies, nothing's really going to change in that interface between the tech workers and the rest of the community around them. So I think once you have your book clubs and you eat some of your salmon and you reflect into the pond, really pushing some sort of organization, and whether it's a union or it's some kind of large group, Google workers, they had that big, it was a union, but not really a typical union, but they were still able to do a lot of like press releases and advocacy and reaching out to politicians on behalf of a large base of Google workers. That's a great model. I think if more tech workers can do something like that, it would actually start to change stuff. And I'm sorry to have to be the one to be like, they just need to actually think about the consequences of their actions as like a starting point. But oftentimes it's kind of where it's at. And I think, my story kind of shows that once you start crossing that threshold sometimes and raising concerns, you can meet fierce opposition, which is one of the reasons I think they retreat into the little fascist salmon bubble. So that kind of just goes to like, we all need to organize together and be a force that just can't be squashed, one off like the little bugs like they like to do. So everyone organizing together, protecting each other. And San Francisco is such a great model with general strikes. with huge attempts to do organized efforts for labor rights. So we need to go back there and do it again and do it better and harder.
This is the last question. We do got to wrap up.
Hi, thank you guys so much for the for the panel. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to reference your comment on venture capital. So I'm actually a scientist in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, and if anyone knows, drug development has been entirely captured by venture capital. I've actually been unemployed for 8 months because of all the effects of what's been going on with the industry, like the insanity at the FDA, the cutting of public academic research, which a lot of private corporations actually steal and then develop to make new drugs, infamously. I don't know if people are aware, but at UCSF in Mission Bay, there's actually a building called Genentech Hall. And the reason why Genentech Hall is there is because the founders of Genentech, which is one of the first big classic pharma companies, actually stole research from UCSF. And the resultant settlement is what actually paid for that building. So that's why Genentech Hall is there. And a lot of people aren't aware of that history. So I guess I was just really interested to hear more about the worker-run alternatives to venture capital, because I just know how devastating it is to these industries and how differently things could be run if workers were in charge. Because if scientists were in charge of pharma, it would be a much different industry. So I'd really like to hear what those alternatives look like.
That's why I was hoping that Adrian from DARE would be here, because she would have been really good at explaining this. But for me, I can speak to it a little bit, and then maybe Ashley could fill in a little bit. But I think of an example that's described in Empire of AI, where the Maori community in New Zealand, they their language is dying out, and basically, like, what happened there was there were some researchers that that went to New Zealand and had conversations with the Maori population there, and the data, they were like, okay, how can we help you out here and make sure that your language and culture doesn't die out? And there was a worker-driven or individual-driven data collection process, which was fully, it kind of spread like wildfire, because all of the people in the community there were like, okay, yeah, I'll send you an hour recording of me speaking Maori if it helps us, and so it was like a sort of like the thing to note here is it's following all these good practices of what I talked about earlier, where it's like models that are very specific to one purpose, getting data collection in a consensual, mutualistic way, maintaining iterative feedback from the community that you're building the product for. So I guess that's what the example that came to mind when I was thinking of an alternative to the venture capital everything model. We need an AI model that's going to do everything. That was a tangible example where but maybe Ashley has something more something else. But all I have are anecdotes. As for understanding that's definitely where my I'm curious to learn about. But yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so to the scientist friends, I think this is where it's important to get creative of how you can organize and speak out about this and try to create change. So it might not look like a labor union. It definitely could consider it. But it could look like something like a union of concerned scientists. It could look like open letters. It could look like joint comments submitted and during rulemaking processes. There's a lot of options there that the impact can be dramatically enhanced when it's a group of people versus one person. And one person can still do it for sure. It's a great thing. You have extra time, definitely submit comments and rulemaking and stuff. But if you can get like-minded folks together who want to try to cause change and reform stuff, especially with whatever, the scientists generally have kind of a niche area that they're in, functionally and then substantively too, and would know where the biggest kind of gaps and vulnerabilities are, where things could be maybe pushed to cause greater change. So brainstorming of what kind of letters, advocacy, speaking out could come from the actual subject matter experts about whatever it is. And I was kind of saying, you have to kind of, when you're negotiating with the tech worker terrorists, you have to talk in their language to try to get them to back down and be like, can you open your mind and think like a human again, please? Because the companies are trying to make them, not. So, but if you speak to your audience, so if you're scientists and you're speaking to regulators or you're speaking to venture capital folks who know the science, speak in the science, do the case studies, point out how if you did it in this better, more ethical way, how you'd actually have a better output, better quality data. Sometimes you have to sell the like even better earnings if you do it the right way, to try to get them to listen. But if you have a big group of folks who can actually document that stuff, and especially coming from folks with PhDs and who have that expertise, it gives a great credibility for those arguments, especially if you can turn it into a case study. Some of the most compelling stuff I've seen has kind of come from that forum. But I think it takes enough people to kind of like wake up and realize they want change and organize together and actually do something like that. But from what I've seen, those can be extraordinarily effective.
Okay, I want to thank you, Ashley and Neil, for your contributions. And we've had a great discussion today, and I think that we want to continue this, and I want to thank all the people who've come here to the meeting at the Court Theater and also who've been online. We've got to continue the debate and discussion, and it's not going away. It's actually going to grow as a critical issue for working people of San Francisco and of this country. So thanks for joining us. Solidarity, brothers and sisters.